start back. The next portion of today's session is around organizing our content. So we have our library, we have a ton of documents within our library, but now, you know, over time that's going to expand. How do we keep all that information organized? You can use folders. A lot of individuals use folders, but what we recommend is to use something called metadata. Now, metadata is basically just a word, a label that you're going to give your document to add additional information about that document. It's an attribute about that document. And we're going to talk about metadata and what that really means. And what I like to start out is a real-world example of what metadata is. So imagine we're at the grocery store. We walk down that canned food aisle, and there's not one single label on those canned foods, right? All those labels are gone. How would we ever know what was inside that can? That's the same thing within our document. You know, how do we know what that document is without opening it and looking into seeing what's inside that? So if we had a can that didn't have a label, how would we know? Is it a fruit or a vegetable? You know, what brand is it? You know, we wouldn't even know that type of information. But now, luckily, we go to the grocery store, we walk down that aisle, and the label's there. So what are the things that we're capturing about any single can? You know, we have things like the brand. Is it a Del Monte? Is it Campbell's Soup? Is it Green Giant? That's a type of metadata that we're capturing about that can of contents. You know, what type of food? Is it a fruit or vegetable? Is it some kind of canned meat? Whatever it may be, we have a title. You know, is it chicken noodle soup? Is it pineapples? Whatever that title might be. Then we have additional information that we may not necessarily think about, but it's all available on that label. So we have things like total fat content. You know, what's the serving size? But also the all important, you know, stamp maybe on the bottom of that can, the expiration date, because we definitely don't want to eat something that has expired. So that is a real-world example of what metadata is. It's just a label. It's just some kind of attribute that we can tell about the information. So when we apply that to our business content, we can think of it in a few different ways. Why would we use metadata? You know, why wouldn't we just use a folder structure? Metadata is going to allow us to utilize some of the custom or the standardized features that come with our document libraries. So out of the box, you have a document library. You have things like filtering that you can do on the fly. You can do certain sorting functions by using metadata instead of using a folder structure. You can also help with search results. So if we have a lot of documents, but we're applying attributes to those documents, that information is also being indexed whenever the search crawler goes to that information. So you're able to pull back things quicker and be able to find your information a little bit faster by using this metadata. So let's take an example of a business example. We have a document. Typically on our machines we have a file structure, and this is an example of a client type of file structure. I have two folders. One's for client A and client B, and then under that I've got an identified structure that I'm using. I have all my documents that are design documents in one folder. I have all my requirements documents in another folder. I have my user documentation in a third folder. So I have this structure, and I've got things broken out into some kind of organization. Or if I had that same type of methodology, I could apply it to columns within a document library and be able to use some out-of-the-box function. So I could have 2 columns added to my document library, one of them called client. And within that column, I'd have my options, client A, client B, client C, whatever it might be. Then under another column, that could be my document type. Is it a requirements document? Is it a design document? And I could tag those documents with those key terms. Now, what does this allow me to do? I can, for one, use common filtering that's real standard right in the library, where I on the fly can say, give me all the documents tagged for client A that are requirements. Now all of my documents, maybe I had 50 documents, that goes down to 2 or 3 documents tagged with that information. On the same side of that is, maybe in that file structure, I was duplicating documents. So there was a design document that I used for client A and client B, so I was creating duplicates and putting them in those folders for those clients. Here I can tag it with both client A and client B and only have one document, make changes to one document, and that gets updated for both of those clients. So it's building efficiency into that process as well. Okay, so that is kind of why and how you can use the metadata to make life a little bit easier. To utilize metadata, you would add columns to your document library or to your list or any of the apps that's within your site. So you add a column to your site, document library, and then within that document library, you would get to choose what type of column it was. There is a lot of different options you can choose for the type of column you're going to add. Starting at the very beginning, there's something called a single line text column, but that's a free form column. What that means is you get a field, you can type anything in that field. Where that becomes a lot of issue is if you have a lot of hands working in your document library. I could tag it one way, Emily might tag it another, Tammy comes in, tags it a third way. What I always recommend is a choice column. What that is you get to decide the terms that individuals are using to tag your information. So if I want requirements and design to be one of the options, I decide that, I put it in a choice column, and individuals that come in there has to choose from my options. And that's a way to build consistency throughout your document libraries. Now there's a whole other groups of items. So date and time, for instance, maybe you want to tag by a specific meeting date that you have. You could use a date time field and select the actual meeting date. Other things like a calculated column, that's a more advanced column type. And what that allows you to do is actually create a calculation based on other columns. So just an example of how we've used a calculated column in the past. When we were going through the migration process, we had about 260 sites, and we had to communicate to every site owner that the site was getting ready to be migrated. So what we did is we had a column called target migration date, and all that had been filled out, but we had to send out communications. So we used a calculated column, first communication, and we were able to put in a formula that basically said, take the target migration date and subtract 21 days, and that's the date the first communication should go out. So it automatically populated for us when communications should happen, and then we were able to take that information and put it in a calendar view so we could see the dates that communications should be sent. So that's one way you could utilize a calculated column. Now, there's tons of formulas and different things you can do with a calculated column. That is just an example. And there's a lot of information out on the internet about calculated columns if you have interest in that. Before I ever get started creating columns in SharePoint, I always, even if it's on just a piece of paper and I just kind of sketch it out, I always decide what my columns are going to be and what information is going to live in those columns. That way you're organized before you even get in there to make your columns. So for example, this is what we're going to work through today. We're going to build a column called document type, and it's going to be a choice column, and we're going to have the contents in that column. So these are the choices that we're going to pick from. Same thing with topic. It's a choice column, and we're going to have certain things that you can choose from. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to work through creating those columns. So if you go back over to the team site, if you're not in your document library, go ahead and go to the gear icon and go to Site Contents and pick your document library from the groupings. I'm going to go into Amy's documents. You can add a column in a couple different ways. The first way I'm going to show you is through the library tab. So if you go to the library tab, it's the fourth kind of grouping over called Create Column. Also, one thing to note is your ribbon may look a little different based on the resolution of your screen. So if yours looks like mine now, and then you get back to your office and you have a huge resolution, it could expand or contract your icons, so just note that. Go ahead and select Create Column. It is the fourth kind of grouping over right under Modify View. So yours didn't say Create Column, the resolution. Yep. So that's the condensed version of the ribbon. So I'm going to name this Document Type. And the second thing is to pick the type of column that you want to live in this column. So type of information you want to live in this column. So if I wanted it to be a number or a hyperlink, I could choose that out of this menu. For us, we want this to be a choice column. So go ahead and select choice. When you do that, it will populate additional fields here below. So you'll see things like, is this column to be required? A lot of times you'll want to say yes here, because if you don't select yes, basically anyone can load documents into anyone that has access to the library can load documents but not have to actually tag them with anything. So if you leave it no, then they don't have to tag information. You can also make a selection of what choices you want to be available. So go ahead and delete what's there in that field currently. And we're going to add our choices: meeting, requirements, and design. Okay. The next piece here is to display how you want that field to display. So if I select a drop-down menu, what it's going to do is only allow you to select one of these three options. If you want an individual to be able to select multiple selections, you would want to select the checkbox radio box. In this case, we want it to be multi-selection because it could be a requirements document that I also used in a meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and say checkboxes. And then the last piece here is the default value. typically that is populated with the first item in the list. So I always ask that you leave that blank. So if it auto-populated meeting in there, go ahead and delete that.
So we don't have a default at all then.
Right. So it's forcing you to make a selection instead of it defaulting to something. Okay, so once you do all those things, go ahead and select OK. Once you select OK, you should now see that additional column in your listing. Okay, so doc type is there. Let's go ahead and create our second column. So Library tab, Create Column. This column is going to be called Topic. It's going to be a choice column, so I'm going to select the radio box next to choice. If I scroll down, I'm going to enter the choices to PeopleSoft and mobile web. Let's do that. Okay, and then for this one, we do want it to only be one of the two options, so I'm going to leave this as a drop-down menu because that means only one thing can be selected. And then down here in the default value, go ahead and delete that default choice. Hit OK. And now we see our topic column. I'm going to go ahead and add a third column. We could come up here and do create column, but I also want to show you that you can create a column through the library settings area. So on that library tab, if you go to library settings, that takes you back to where we turned on versioning earlier. If you scroll down, about halfway down the page is a section called columns. And this is going to be all the columns that's associated with this document library. So you're going to notice that there's some columns already there, such as created by. So it's going to capture who's created it, who's modified it, the date and times that it's modified and created. You're also going to see those new custom columns we created. So doc type and topic. If after the initial creation of the column you need to go back and add in additional choices, you could come into the library settings, select the column from this area, and that's going to allow you to go in and make edits to your choices. So if you needed to go in and add a third topic, you could add that here. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. So to create a column from this area, below columns is a link called Create Column. I'm going to select that. It's going to take me directly back into that Create Column dialog. So the third column is the year column. I'm going to have that to be a choice. And I'm going to do a 2013, 2014, 2015. We only want the document for this case to be one item, so I'm going to leave it a drop down. And then the very bottom here, I'm going to delete that default value and hit OK. All right.
What type of column would you use the radio button for?
The radio button column type, if you had a if you just didn't prefer to use a drop-down menu and wanted to be able to see all of them kind of listed out and you select it from the listing, you could select that radio type, yeah.
Or that's more of an aesthetic choice, and also if we have two choices, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, yep. So, that added our column in. Now once we're in the settings area, if you want to go back to your document library, the very top you see the title. It's actually a breadcrumb that will take you back to your library. So if you select that, it takes you back into your library. So now we have our 3 columns, and we have all of our documents. We're ready to start tagging our information, so adding those labels to the information. We can do that in a couple different ways. One way is to select the item itself. We can go up to the Files tab and say Edit Properties. That's going to take us into the properties of just that document, and we can tag this. So I could say this is a meeting document that's mobile web and it's from 2013 and save it. So I could do it that way. If you have a ton of documents, this could take a while. So there is an easier way. You can do it through what we call a quick edit mode window. So if you come over to the Library tab, there is an option that says Quick Edit. It's the second from the left. So select Quick Edit. That'll take you into more of a grid-like experience. You can come in now to the fields and select from a drop-down the items. You could also, if you know that multiple documents need to be tagged with the same term, you could drag and drop. So you can multi-tag. So I'm just going to go ahead and tag these with certain items. Nothing in particular. This is more of an example. So if you want to go ahead and tag your documents as well. Okay, so is everybody able to tag their information? Mm-hmm. Once you are done tagging, you can go back out of this quick edit mode by selecting the view icon in the Library tab. That takes you back to the regular standard view for your document library. So now we have our documents, we have things tagged. There is out-of-the-box features with our document library where we can just come now to the column itself and filter on particular tags. So maybe I want to find all the meeting documents. I select that and it filtered it down for me. So what was about 10 documents went down to just 1. Maybe I want requirement and design documents. I could see just those documents. I want to see requirements documents from 2014, for instance. I could filter that down. So now we have this, this functionality that is available to us through the library filtering by using the tags that we used. Before, if we had used a folder, for example, we would have to go into that folder to see what lived within the folder itself. We couldn't just filter based on certain criteria. You can also use the sorting options as well. So if I wanted to see things ascending or descending, you could do that. 2014 probably isn't the best one to do. So for example, if I wanted to see I could do ascending and descending orders. So we have that functionality. it's available to us too. So do you see the value in building out those columns and establishing those metadata terms? The next piece is, now we have our document library, we have all these documents tagged. Maybe I want a specialized view for a particular audience, for instance. Maybe you have a subset group of individuals on your team and you want to create a view specialized for them. Or you want that standard view to be something like a grouped by type of view, where you're grouping by the topic or something to that effect. We can create views, which is just essentially a window into that information. You have your all documents, but maybe we want to see a smaller view of what lives inside that document library. It's going to allow us to create that from the ribbon, but also from the library settings. So where we were at earlier when we created those columns, we can also create views. There's going to be 4 types of views that you can create. The standard view is basically what we're used to when we're in the document library. So that's more of a column list type view. You have your columns, you have your documents. You could create a calendar view if you needed to. A calendar view is going to be a display on an actual calendar grid. An example of that might be, maybe you have documents that are tagged to a specific due date and you wanted to create a calendar that listed those documents. You could create a calendar view of that. Data sheet view is what we did earlier when we went into quick edit mode and it took us into that grid view where we can make edits on the fly. That is a data sheet view, and you can create a specialized data sheet view if you needed to. And then the last one is this Gantt view, and that is for visual project tracking. So if you want to see things on a timeline versus a calendar itself, you can create that type of view. So we're going to go in and create a new view. So I'm on my document library. Up on the library tab is an option that says create view. It's the third icon over. Go ahead and select create view. This is going to be a standard view. I'm going to select standard from this category. And then my view name is going to be called grouped by. You'll notice that you can, as a site owner, make this the default view. So when individuals come to your document library, they can see this view. If you do not select default, then it just adds it as a view that they can choose from the listing. You can create a personal view, and that view is only going to be viewed by you. So other individuals won't see that in their views to choose from. But you can also create a public view as a site owner. You can choose what columns are available in a view. So for instance, maybe I don't want the modified or modified by to be visible in this view. I can uncheck those boxes. I can also sort the columns. So maybe I want the topic to be the third column. I can choose that to be how I want them to be organized. If I scroll down a little bit further, I can choose how it sorts. So I can choose to leave it as none, or I can sort it by the title, ascending or descending order. The next section is to filter things. So maybe I want to only see 2015 documents. I could filter by the year and make sure that the year is equal to 2015. It's only going to pull back that information. For now, I'm going to leave this without a filter just so that you all can see this. And then I'm going to create another view here in a second with a filter applied to it. The last piece here is expand that grouped by section. Grouped by allows you to actually pick what column you want to group by. So in our case, I want to group by topic. And that's going to pull all those documents that are in the same topic category into one area. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So scroll down to the bottom, hit OK. Perfect. Let's see if it... So by creating that view, I get something that's very similar to what I may have seen when I had that folder structure to begin with, but now I still have the functionality to sort and do my filtering and still keep that view intact. So that's one way to kind of simplify your view and create a standard view that all of your team can utilize. You can still drag and drop files in here. You can still tag from this particular view as well. Any questions about that?
How do you edit once you've created it?
Edit the view. On the library tab, there is a link that says modify view. That'll take you in so that you can modify this specific view. Yep. You can also delete your views. If you've created a view you don't want anymore, you can delete it from there. Also, you'll notice now that we've created additional views, if we go to the library tab, under the current view heading, if you select that drop down, you'll see additional views. So I could go back to my default view, which is all documents, or if I wanted to switch back to my grouped by view, I see it as well. So I can choose. You'll also see your views right here above the documents. So I could go to my all documents or grouped by as well. So that's one way you can do that.
So on the web services peer team, I can go in and change my view of it?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Then you can create additional views. So I'm going to go in and create another view. This time let's do it from the library settings. So library tab, library settings. That's going to take us to our settings page. At the very bottom of that page, you can see all the views that are available. So if you needed to make an edit to your view, you could also do it through this by selecting the view you want to change, or you can create a new view by selecting Create View. I'm going to say Standard View. This view is only going to be the 2015 documents, so I want to have a filter on that. I'm going to remove the modified and modified by and the year. And then I want to sort that by the title. And then lastly, I want to change the filter. And I only want to show items from the year that is equal to 2015. So we notice that when we use this drop down, we have a lot of different things to choose from. We can choose is equal to, is not equal to, is greater than. So if you had a calculation and you wanted to pull back anything that's greater than 1,000, for instance, you could pull that back. Contains, if it contains a certain word, you want it to be pulled back in this view. So you have a bunch of different things you can choose from. So my year is equal to 2015. If I hit OK, that's going to simplify that. I had only tagged one document apparently with 2015, so it pulled back that one document into the view. So if I had a library with 200-300 documents, maybe this view pulled back 20 documents, and I can easily navigate through those. You can still switch to your grouped by, switch back to your filtered list. So also, you'll notice that there's a find a file search box. Once the indexer has crawled your document library, it can take anywhere from a minute, 10 minutes to a day for the crawler to get there according to activity that's going on. It shouldn't take any more than a day, but once you have that, you can use this search and it's going to pull back information just within that library. So I find that pretty useful as well, for it to pull back information for me. Okay. So we modified. Questions about views? All right. Last thing I want to show you is alerts for your document libraries before we move on to other apps on the site. So a lot of times individuals will ask, can I set up a notification if I'm curious about changes that are happening within my documents? You can set up alerts. It can be on the document library itself, or it can be on a single document. So if you're only curious about a document. So to set up on the library itself, you go to the library tab, say alert me. It's about halfway over on the ribbon. When you select alert me, it's going to say set up alert. From this option, you can say what the title of this alert is going to be. So when it comes to you in email, what you want it to say as the title. You can, as a site owner, add individuals into the alerts. Do note that they can remove themselves, so they can always manage that and remove themselves from the alerts. Then you get to choose what type of alert you want to get. Is it when new things get added? Is it when things get changed? Is it when someone comes in and makes a change to just a document that you added? Whatever it may be. There's a ton of different options. You select that. And then you can also select how and when you get it. So do you want it to know immediately, or do you want a daily digest that shows everything? You can choose that as well. So there's that. Now if you wanted to just know about a document, so maybe I want to know when the roster gets updated, I would select the check mark next to the roster. Okay, let me refresh real quick. Select the check mark next to the roster, and then when you do that, it's going to highlight the alert me on the files tab that says set an alert on this document. So instead of the library, it's only going to notify me about this document. You have all the same options you can choose from, and then you hit OK. So that'll send you notifications. If you need to go in and manage your notifications, so eventually you don't want to know about it anymore, you come into alert me and say manage. And that's where you're going to be able to remove yourself from your alerts. Okay. Any questions about document libraries? That is a lot of information, right? So I'm going to give you more information. All the things that we've talked about so far have been talking about mostly document libraries. But all those concepts, adding views, creating columns, modifying that particular app, going to library settings, those are the same sort of thing you can do on other apps that you add to your team site as well. So if you had a custom list, for instance, you could create columns to that list, and you could manage views on that data that's managed within that list. So we won't dive in too deep about doing those specific tasks for those items, but you now have the foundation that allows you to go and start utilizing these pieces within your team site. So you have your document library. What other apps are available? You have lists that are out of the box that you can add. So some of those options are announcements, a discussion list. You can add a task list. So all those things are available, and I suggest that if you are interested in some of these items, utilize this sandbox area to see, you know, what a task list looks like. Go out there, add it to the sandbox, work with it, and then you can use it on your own team site later on. You can build custom lists that would have custom columns, and then you could actually use that as a template and add additional lists using that template. So there's a few different things that we can do there. Also, there is one app that I wanted to let you know about in case you use Excel and you have an Excel spreadsheet that you want to import as a list. It's called Import Spreadsheet, and what it does is if you have columns already established within Excel, you can import it using this app, and it'll keep those columns intact. It'll go ahead and build out your columns for you within your SharePoint list. So it's pretty handy. You can create views on this data once it's imported. You can add additional columns and all that sort of thing after you've imported from that spreadsheet. Do note that it does have a 5,000 item limit. So if you're working with data that has more rows than 5,000, then this may not be an option. You may want to use something more advanced like Excel services, which there's an app out there for. Another list that you can add is called a calendar, and a calendar is a good way to share important dates and events going on with your team. You'll add that from the Add an App icon. One of the options there will be calendar. So when you go to the calendar, you can add a new event. You can do that through the calendar interface itself or from the ribbon as add a new event. And also within the calendar, you'll find that really handy feature that I talked about this morning called Connect with Outlook. If you select Connect with Outlook, that will make a connection with your Outlook client, and that is going to allow you to see your team calendar side by side with your personal calendar within Outlook. Okay, so I'm going to quickly add a calendar so you can see that particular piece. So on your team site, if you go to the gear icon, go to Site Contents, you can add an app, and from this options is calendar. So go to the very bottom of the page and hit the page button, and calendar should be on that second page. It's at the top for me. So calendar, I'm going to name this Amy's calendar. You can name it with your name. Once you've named it, hit create, and you should get your new calendar. So I'm going to select my calendar to go in. You'll see that it has the standard default grid view. If you needed to add an event, you could hover over the date, and you'll notice that when you hover over the date, an add icon appears. You can select add. That's going to pull up a dialog box for you to add your item, a detail. One thing to note about this is just metadata columns. So, you know, they have a location field. That's just a column called location that you're storing that information in. For example, category, that's a column that has a drop-down choice with categories that you're choosing from. So you could customize this listing to be whatever you need it to be. Just because out of the box it has meeting and work hours as options, you could remove options from this list, or you could add additional things. So for instance, on premise we tag things with, you know, system-wide event versus a local event, for instance. I'm going to go ahead and add a quick event here. So cookout, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. in the courtyard. I could add detail. It's a get together. I'll go ahead and save that. Once I save it, it's added to my calendar. Now there is a couple of views already associated with your calendar. This top view or default view is the calendar view for your calendar list. But if you wanted to go to more of a list view of these dates, go to that calendar tab, and under the current view you could change that to all events. And now I'm going to have a list view of that same information. So you'll notice that this is an example of how they're using metadata to create multiple views on top of their app. So it's got a calendar view, it's got a list view, standard view here of that information. I'm going to go back to my calendar view. Now if I wanted to connect this with Outlook, I don't have Outlook client installed on this machine, but if I wanted to connect it, I would just go to the calendar tab, select connect with Outlook. It'll pop up a wizard that says, are you sure you want to connect? Hit OK, and it will then add this calendar within your Outlook client. Okay?
Which means those calendar items then go to your Outlook.
That's right. Yeah. It'll be a separate calendar, but it'll be.
They don't go into your personal calendar.
Oh,
Yeah.
You'll have multiple calendars.
Side by side.
Yeah. And then you could create an overlay view if you needed to. Sure. All right.
So you share this with other people on your Q site by doing what? Sorry.
It's automatically going to inherit from the permissions of the site itself, unless you choose to stop inheriting for this calendar or open the calendar to other individuals that aren't on your team. Yep. And we'll talk about that specifically in the permissions talk here in just one second. Okay. All right. Well, we're almost done. So we have just a couple more items to talk about. The next item is team site permissions. All right. So when we talk about team site permissions, this is a responsibility of the site owner. So as a site owner, you can maintain the security of the site. You can add permissions, obviously, to the site itself, but you can go as granular as changing the permission to a folder or an item that lives on your site. So you could have 10 individuals on your site. 5 of those have access to a document library. 2 of those have access to a file that lives in that document library. So it could go down very granular. By default, though, it is going to inherit from the parent. So if you add an app, it's going to inherit the permission from the site itself, unless you go into that app and say otherwise. So it's going to inherit from that parent. We do recommend that you use SharePoint groups whenever possible to maintain your permissions. So if you have, if you go into your site permissions and you want to create a new permission for individuals, put them in a group. That helps with maintaining those particular permissions. By adding them in directly into the root of the site, for instance, it makes things a little bit messy. By default, you're going to have 3 groups when you have a new site. The visitors group is going to have read access. That means they can only come into the site. They can read the content, but they can't change the documents or anything. Members is going to, if it's a new team site moving forward, those individuals have an edit access. Basically what that means is they can add, delete documents, make changes to documents, but they can also add and delete lists in libraries. So if they need to add an app, they could do that. Now on the point, which was in 2007, the members group actually had what we call contribute access. That meant those people could add and edit documents, but they couldn't do anything with apps, so they couldn't add a document library. So note that you can take a look to see what access they have before you move them into those groups. And then of course the owners have full control. So here is something that you can go back to if you're unsure of what access you're giving an individual. Edit can edit, add, and delete lists and libraries. They can delete the items, and then contribute. You have your read, and then you also have a couple of other settings like designer, which allows the individuals to change the themes, layouts of pages, that kind of thing, and then a view only state, so they can only view those documents. To do manage permissions, you would go to that site settings menu, and we would go to an item called site permissions. You'll see the groups that make up your permissions, and then you can go into those groups by selecting the group name and then add individuals from that group. Once you're inside the group itself, you're going to get an option that says new. You select that and it's going to say add users. By adding the users, it's going to pull up the dialog box where you type in their name. I always suggest that you type in last name, comma, first name. This allows you to find individuals more accurately, I think. A lot of times individuals may go by a certain name, where in AD that isn't really the name that they have in Active Directory. So if you type in Varney/Matt, for example, you're more apt to get the actual account you're looking for. You are supposed to be able to type in an email address, but a lot of times you don't know if that's amy.coleman or acoleman0032, so I always suggest to do last name, comma, first name. One thing to note, when you go in to make your changes, you'll see this link at the very bottom of that window. It says show options. You select that show options, and it's going to expand out with one checkbox. I have no idea why they put one checkbox inside of that, but they did. And that checkbox says, send an email invitation. Now by default, that is checked. So it's going to send an email by default. The reason why I always like to make you all aware of this is if later down the line you're altering permissions, let's say you're moving them from one group to another, you don't necessarily want them to have an email notification sent out every time. So know that that checkbox is there, and that if you want an email to go, it will when that checkbox is checked, but if you don't want it, remove that check. Okay? Before we look at permissions, I always like to say, be mindful of giving everyone access to your site. Let's make sure that there's a real business need for the whole college or all employees to have access. You can use security groups within AD for SharePoint security as well. So if you already have a group that's maintained within AD, you could add that security group within SharePoint, and when it gets updated in Active Directory, it'll automatically get updated in your SharePoint site. Okay? And then if you give everybody access, just know that they will see it on their My Teams page. So let's take a look at the security site permissions section.
One thing I'll say about doing this through AD groups, there is a distinct advantage in that, and the fact that if someone gets let go or if you need to make changes, it's clearly delineated what permissions they have versus having to sort of go out and discover it.
Right. We're hoping to, right now there's not a tool that you can go in and see where an individual has access within SharePoint, but hopefully we'll be able to purchase a tool in the next, probably the next 6 months or so, if it works out, where you can go in, if an employee leaves, you can see where they had access and go ahead and remove them. But yeah, as he mentioned, right now that isn't available, so Active Directory would be a good option there. So to manage site permissions, you go up to the gear icon, go down to site settings.
Where did you start?
Right on my team site, anywhere within the team site. Yep. The gear, yep. That gear icon, site settings, and then on the site settings page is a link that says site permissions. And it's in that first column, second link down, site permissions. So go ahead and select that. This is the permissions groups for this particular team site. So you'll see your visitors, your members, and your owners. You'll see that the members group has edit permissions, the visitors has read, and the owners has full control. At the very top of the page, you'll also see where you can create groups. So if you needed to add new groups, if you wanted to check to see what someone's permissions was, you could check it through that mechanism. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the visitors group. So I'm going to select visitors. And now I'm within the deep dive visitors group. I can select the new option, add users.
That's where you put their names in.
Yeah, this is where you add the individual's name. So I'm going to add an individual to the site. Or if I had a security group, I could add the security group. It would resolve that as well. I can type in a message here that's going to be part of the email that goes out to everyone. If I don't want an email to be sent, I can select the show options here and uncheck the checkbox. So without that, it's going to send that email to this individual. I'm going to hit share. So once I hit share, I've had now see that individual added to the listing. So everybody